I think we have a new record for most lies told by a politician in less than 90 seconds. And I know that's a pretty high bar. But Mike Pence did it. He got five. Five complete, distinct lies in his statement about Venezuela. So without any further ado, so that I don't misquote the man, I'm going to let him speak and then break it down for you and show you exactly how unbelievably dishonest this man is.
Hola, I'm Mike Pence, the Vice President of the United States. And on behalf of President Donald Trump and all the American people, let me express the unwavering support of the United States as you, the people of Venezuela, raise your voices in a call for freedom. Nicolas Maduro is a dictator.
Lie number one.
With no legitimate claim to power.
Lie number two.
He's never won the presidency in a free and fair election.
Lie number three.
And he's maintained his grip of power by imprisoning anyone who dares to oppose him.
Lie number four.
The United States joins with all freedom-loving nations in recognizing the National Assembly as the last vestige of democracy in your country.
Lie number five.
For it's the only body elected by you, the people.
Actually, technically, that could be lie number six, and we're 48 seconds in, so that might even be a new record.
As such, the United States supports the courageous decision by Juan Guaido, the President of your National Assembly, to assert that body's constitutional powers, declare Maduro a usurper, and call for the establishment of a transitional government.
That's a falsehood, technically not a lie, but we're going to go ahead and count it. So that's up to 7, 1 minute and 6 seconds.
As you make your voices heard tomorrow, on behalf of the American people, we say to all the good people of Venezuela, Estamos con ustedes. We are with you. We stand with you. And we will stay with you until democracy is restored and you reclaim your birthright of libertad.
That's an interesting term, birthright. Because there was a movement some time ago in this hemisphere to get away from birthright rule and rule by election. That's how free peoples in republics operate. Now, 7 different falsehoods, 5 for sure lies. Maduro, no claim to power, is lie number 1. Maduro won an election in 2013 against Enrique Capriles Radonsky, 6 months after Hugo Chavez won an election against the same man. He just passed on, and the new constitution, the Bolivarian constitution, that was put into place in 1999, required that election to take place. So Radonsky was beaten twice, once by Chavez, 6 months later by Maduro. That election in 2013 brought us up to the modern day. That's why you're seeing Mike Pence now, after January 10th, like I said, when everything was going to change, and not before. Because the U.S. recognized that election and recognized all of the elections from 1999 to 2013 as well. So, no claim to power, total lie. Second thing he said, Nicolas Maduro's never a dictator that's never won a free and fair election. Horseshit. If that were the case, we wouldn't have waited until January 10th. We would have said he was a usurper last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Never said that. They would have stood up the president of the National Assembly then and said they were going to recognize him then. They didn't do so. Meaning they recognized him as the legitimate leader of Venezuela, which he was. So that's 2 lies. Lie number 3, imprisoning anyone who stands in his way. He could have imprisoned Guaido. He hasn't. He did imprison a guy named Antonio Ledesma for a couple of months for conspiring to overthrow the government. He was released on house arrest for humanitarian reasons because he was sick, and he took advantage, Ledesma did, of that and was able to slip out and cross the border into Colombia and then fly to Spain. if Maduro was really the terrible, horrible, evil socialist criminal that you'd think, he would have never saw the light of day. So that's line number 3. The National Assembly. That was made illegal by Nicolas Maduro. Guess who actually created the National Assembly? The National Assembly was created by Hugo Chavez. See, they used to have what they called a bicameral legislative body like we do here, a House and a Senate, and that was abolished in 99 because it had become so corrupt, just like ours is. Now, what you have in front of you here is, I have gone through and highlighted the basic fundamental history of Venezuela from 98 to present, and I'm going to go over this, all of the elections that the U.S. recognized and honored by the simple fact that we cut deals with the Venezuelans. We operated in conjunction with the Venezuelans on many different fronts during this time, meaning that there was tacit acknowledgement that that government was, in fact, credible. Now, the first one, 1998 election, 63% turnout, and Chavez won with 56% of the vote. Beginning 27 February 1999, the 10th anniversary of the Caracazo massacre, I'm going to do another video on that, Chavez set into motion a social welfare program called Plan Bolivar 2000. He said he had allotted $20.8 million for the plan, though some say the program cost $113 million. Now remember, at this time, Venezuela was bringing in billions in oil revenue. This isn't very much money. The plan involved 70,000 soldiers, sailors, and members of the Air Force repairing roads, hospitals, removing stagnant water that offered breeding area for disease-carrying mosquitoes, offering free medical care and vaccinations, and selling food at low prices. Oh, what a terrible, evil, horrible dictator he is. And at night, after doing that, he had his own television and radio show where he sang songs, told jokes, and was pretty much just a very good guy. In fact, the U.S. didn't demonize Chavez until much later, and they did so at the behest of a lot of big oil, but once again, another video for another day. All right, Chavez called a public referendum. Now, this is the thing that most people do not get. Dictators don't call referendums. Dictators don't put the legality of referendums and the ability of people to call referendums into constitutions, because it gives the people the ability to throw out the dictator. But he called a public referendum which he hoped would support his plan to form a constitutional assembly of representatives from across Venezuela. This is where he started involving the local indigenous peoples in the government. And this was something that those in charge of that area up until that time in the 90s that created this hellhole did not like. They loved their slave labor and they did not want to get rid of it or give them any kind of an idea that they had a say in government. All right. Chavez called an election on 25 July to elect the members of the Constitutional Assembly. Over 900 of the 1,171 candidates standing for election that July were Chavez opponents. Despite the many opposition candidates, Chavez supporters won, taking 95% of the seats. This is how bad things were in the 90s in Venezuela. This is why Chavez had so much support. The poor and the lower middle class types were absolutely getting clobbered by the government, and there was this rich, elite, wealthy, super duper duper wealthy upper crust, more wealthy than most Americans, that were running the show. And most of the U.S. knew nothing about this. This is why this simple soldier, Chavez, came to power, and I think it's very ironic that the guy he had take over was a simple bus driver. This is why the elites don't like Venezuela. All right, Chavez supporting Constituent Assembly put together a new constitution in December 1999. We've covered this in other videos. I'll see if I can go find that link. This is the constitution that says family means a man and a woman, and that they constitutionally have a duty to raise those children properly. The children have a duty to work, and in old age, the children have a constitutional duty to take care of their parents. They also give Social Security benefits to housewives. These are the types of things that are in the Bolivarian Constitution. All right, so he also expanded the presidential term from 6 years twice. Instead of it being 10 years, it was now 12 years. That was his big expansion of power, 2 years. And it states here, replaced the bicameral Congress with a unicameral legislative assembly known as the National Assembly. Now, under his new constitution, you would think, okay, here's this dictator, right? And he's just had this new constitution put in. He probably isn't going to have any elections anytime soon, right? Wrong. Under the new constitution, it was legally required that new elections be held in order to re-legitimize his government. Just to prove it to everybody. So this is his second presidential term, 10 January 2001 to 10 January 2007. Won again, re-elected with 60% of the vote, meaning he's expanding. Now, the whole thing with Cuba, everything's, oh, poor, evil Cuba. Oh, Cuba got 53,000 barrels of oil per day in exchange for 20,000 trained Cuban medics and educators, up to 90,000 barrels a day in exchange for 40,000 Cuban medics and teachers. 90,000 barrels a day for a country that does, I think, 2 million barrels a day is nothing. 20, 25 times that goes to the United States. And this is just in exchange for doctors and educators. After the 2000 elections, Chavez supporters gained 101 out of 165 seats. And here's where things really got bad for the tribal types. Because Chavez came out and said, look, our natural resources in our country are going to primarily benefit our people first. Educational reforms. Okay, now, here's where you need to think critically. If this were a terrible, horrible, evil, dictatorial regime that just did whatever the hell it wanted and didn't listen to the people, this should not have occurred. The first organized protest against the Bolivarian government occurred in January 2001 when the Chavez administration tried to implement educational reforms through the proposed Resolution 259 and Decree 1.011, which would have seen the publication of textbooks with a heavy Bolivarian bias. Parents noticed that such textbooks were really Cuban books filled with revolutionary propaganda, outfitted with different covers. The protest movement, which was primarily by middle-class parents whose children went to privately run schools, marched to central Caracas, shouting out the slogan, "Don't mess with my children." Although the protesters were denounced by Chavez, who called them selfish and individualistic, the protest was successful enough for the government to retract the proposed education reforms and instead enter into a consensus-based educational program with the opposition. Why would a dictator even bother to work with his opposition? Why would Maduro have even met with the Democratic Unity Roundtable? Why would there be even people set to do protests in Venezuela tomorrow? If this were some terrible, horrible, evil dictatorial regime that just terrified everybody and killed and imprisoned all of these people, you can go to YouTube right now to VPI TV and look at protest after protest after protest, man on the street, all over the place. This is what makes what Pence said so stupid. And here's the thing with Carmona back in 2002 with the coup. This is where they tried to take some guy, prominent businessman, Pedro Carmona, and put him in charge, taking advantage of people being upset with the government for this, that, or the other. And that's here. A group of high-ranking anti-Chavez military officers had begun planning to launch a coup, using the civil unrest as an opportunity. After the plotters gained significant power, Chavez agreed to be detained. And business leader Pedro Carmona declared himself president of an interim government. Sound familiar? Carmona abolished the Constitution. And that's what set off the entire country, saying, wait a minute, I thought this was the U.S. bringing in freedom and all of this wonderful stuff. Wrong again. Protests in support of Chavez, along with insufficient support for Carmona's regime, which some felt was implementing a totalitarian measures, quickly led to Carmona's resignation, and Chavez was returned to power on 14 April. Giant failure. The 1999 Constitution had introduced the concept of a recall referendum into Venezuelan politics that had never existed before. Chavez put the idea in people's head that if the government wasn't working for them, they could depose the leader. That was put into the vernacular in Venezuela by Hugo Chavez. No one else. Third presidential term, 10 January 2000 to 10 January 2013. 74% voter turnout, Chavez wins 63% of the vote. More referendums where they allow the people to come forth and say, we want to change this about the government. Dictators don't allow referendums. This is where they talk about the death of Chavez and Nicolas Maduro taking power for the remainder and then won another election against Radonsky. Now, there's the effect of Chavez that I'm going to cover here real quick, and then we'll get out of this video since we're 15 minutes in. Income inequality dropped from 98 to 2011. The metric they use is 0.495 to 0.39. Venezuela was only behind Canada, meaning that the only place where there was less income inequality was Canada. The U.S. was worse than Venezuela. Venezuelans aged 15 and older, 95% could also read and write, which hadn't been the case. Highest literacy rate in the region, only behind Peru, Brazil, and Panama. But these are the big numbers. State income from oil revenue grew from 51% of total income in 2000 to 56% in 2006. Oil exports increased from 77% in 97 to 89% in 2006. This was not something that could have been avoided because they have this thing called Dutch disease down there. There was all of this oil, and I know that a lot of people believe, oh, Chavez stole and expropriated. All of the contracts had built into them that if any corruption was found on the part of the Venezuelan government by these big multinational oil companies, they could come in and take them. That's why ConocoPhillips had to go before a civil court. And they wanted $20 billion and they only got $2 billion. But between 98 and 2006, malnutrition deaths fell by 50%. And total malnutrition dropped from 21% to 6% in the same time period. Now, the rest of this goes into talking about speculators and hoarders and that causing the problems with the shortages of food. But the idea is this. There is no dictatorship in Venezuela. There is somebody the U.S. doesn't like because he doesn't listen to their mandates. He charts his own course, much like we did in this country against the crown 300 years ago. Now the shoe's just on the other foot. And we're the ones talking about birthright leadership. So when you see the riots tomorrow, you see all of the crap in the media, I want you to reference this video and understand that there is a plan afoot to try to undercut one of the last sovereign nations in the world. And I'll leave with this. What would happen if, let's say, Turkey or India decided to, or China said, you know what, we don't think the 2016 election in your country was fair or free, so we're just going to recognize Nancy Pelosi as president now. And we're going to take our cue from her, and we're going to negotiate with her. That's the equivalent of what the U.S. is doing now with this Juan Guaido, because she's the elected leader of our legislative body. How would you take that? Even if you didn't agree, whether you did or whether you didn't, it's entirely inappropriate. And people from our government, meaning Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, Pence, and Marco Rubio, to my mind, have violated the law by fomenting insurrection in another country and by talking to leaders of other countries or people they recognize to be leaders of other countries. It's absolutely insane what's going on, and it's criminal, and it needs to stop. And I'm going to, as long as I have breath and the ability, expose this. So we will leave that there. But I suppose when you see this guy and he's holding up the flag of the Cartel de los Soles, one of the most powerful connected drug cartels in the world, you might want to think twice about who you want in charge. Like, share, subscribe.